Yeah, hi. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about how we built our own operating system at Blinkist and a bit of the journey that got us there. So 6 years ago, when Blinkist was founded, it was already an idea that we would look at it as a way to approach, or as a way of working to approach approach the organization a little bit differently in the way that we would work together. And look at alternative ways to do this and not go for this very traditional top-down hierarchical model and tree, but rather look for something that was going to enable the organization and the people within it to work better, to move in different directions, and to just create an overall different and better type of organization with this. Sorry. Okay, yeah. Sorry. So after research and looking into different systems, Holacracy was then adopted. And Holacracy is a system of self-management that is basically very ready to apply to various organizations, and also has a lot of processes and is sort of out of the box ready to be applied in some ways. And so Holacracy was adopted by Blinkist at this time, but it wasn't exactly Holacracy 100%. It was a little bit of what Blinkist needed at the time. And then this was combined to create their own system, which was, of course, called very creatively Blinkeracy, which took aspects of what was needed and how the organization was developing, as well as the organizational system of Holacracy. And this was implemented along with many of the processes that come with Holacracy. And when I say processes, I mean processes, like processes for everything. So it extends from how you run a meeting, for example, to also, of course, how you organize and structure the organization. And a lot of these were then adapted within Blinkist and used. And of course, this worked at the beginning because it had been applied and everything was exactly what it needed to be. When something was needed for the organization, there was a process that was clearly defined for this. But of course, what happens within organizations is that they grow. And as the organization continued to grow, new things come up and the company changes, and obviously lots of different sorts of problems arise, or expectations change, or all these things that naturally occur when the organization gets bigger. And well, Holacracy and Blinkeracy at the time had processes, or at least a source to draw processes, to implement for all of these issues that were coming up. But what also quickly happened as we used more processes to address problems that were more, because the people were also more, is that we started to notice that more rules didn't necessarily create more clarity. So I think it's very natural and easy to say, okay, we see this issue and we think it can be solved and there's a great process for this and we're going to use it. But in fact, what actually happens is that more rules just equals more problems, because you apply something to some case that maybe has occurred once, or maybe was a specific case, and then of course down the line maybe it creates 100 more problems that you didn't anticipate, or maybe it just wasn't that important that a process exists for that particular problem at all. And it got to be to the point where, like, even though everything was running well, we were noticing that some of these processes were getting in our way, which was the original reason that we had adopted Blinkeracy to begin with, so that it wouldn't be a system that would constantly hold us back and get in our way. And even, in fact, the name Holacracy was causing a bit of a problem, because it's a brand and there's a lot of information on the internet about it, so people could Google it and then have an expectation about what it would be. But just because you had Googled Holacracy didn't mean that you would know how it was working at Blinkist. And then, of course, it meant that you would have to explain it, and you would have to explain the special way that we were using it and the processes that were being implemented and such. And of course, when we started to look at this, we thought maybe now it's not the thing that we should continue going with. Maybe we should look at alternate options. And I think it's fair to note as well that it wasn't entirely the fault of Holacracy, or Blinkeracy as it's called. It was also that there's quite a lot of onboarding that has to occur when you have a special way of working. So people are used to working in a certain way, perhaps from a bigger organization or a previous job. And then when you want to operate in a different way, you have to explain this to people, of course. And if the system that you're explaining is complex, then there's a lot of explaining. And we would have also had to commit to explaining this to everybody, which was something that then made us also reflect on this a bit more. And was this something that we were going to commit the time to do, and was it important that we do it? So we had a bit of a transition from this, a little bit of a breakup, but as with all good breakups, you learn something about yourself. And the thing that we learned about ourselves is that even when we were having these difficulties, or when maybe a process didn't work, things were actually running really well. There wasn't some sort of big issue that we were noticing, other than that we could be better. And when we took a step back and we looked at why is everything going so smooth if we still think we need to make a change, we realized that it was really the people within the organization, and that we all sort of were striving for, believed in similar things, and that we really wanted to harness this, if you will, or focus on this, and focus on something that was people as opposed to processes. And so then we thought, okay, we can build something, and we can build our own OS. The original idea came from the idea of like a computer operating system that it turns out that I don't know how a computer operating system works as well as I thought I knew, but we thought that this was kind of the base for it, and we liked this, and if we're going to build it, what does it absolutely need to do? And then we thought, okay, easy, two things. It needs to get stuff done. So back to our original idea of why we had adopted Holacracy to begin with. We wanted to get stuff done in a better way, and it needed to make it look easy. So what we meant by that was that we didn't want to see it at all. We wanted it to operate very much in the background and just allow us to do the more important first thing here. And what this really came down to when we looked at it was that the processes were things that we didn't necessarily need, but we wanted to keep what we did need. We wanted to keep everything that was working, and we wanted to actually just simplify the rest. I think it's really natural to try to make things more complex, to make things clearer, to apply a rule to everything, and to just keep talking to make something better. But in fact, we wanted to just look back at what we absolutely needed. Which brought us to a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of talking with different types of organizations, and actually creating our own system that started with this very idea. So I'm going to tell you about it right now. It is based on 4 core themes. When we started to think about everything, we started very much blank and said, okay, what if we think about it? What are the things that are absolutely important to us and at our core? What are these things that were making the organization work well, that we were all striving for and that we all believed in, even when we were working around processes, for example? And what we came to was self-organization. We were very, very adamant that we wanted to stay self-organized and believed in this. There was personal development, that Blinkist stay a place where people could develop and have room for growth and continue to learn. Transparency, which was also something that had, I guess for us, has its roots in us adopting Holacracy, but also I think just as people, that we believed that within the organization we would stay transparent in the sense of making sure that information that was necessary or useful was never hidden. And distributed authority, which goes back as well to the idea of self-organization, but we wanted to make sure that decision-making power was always very much in the hands of the people who needed it, and not that people were caught up in asking for permission to do something when in fact they could move forward to be more effective by having this within their role. And then we decided that we needed to figure out how, of course, what does this organization that believes so strongly in these 4 themes look like? And we still had circles from Holacracy, and we decided that actually we didn't need to change something that wasn't broken, and that these worked quite well for us. And we continued with the idea of having circles and subcircles within them, because we operate as well with nested purpose. So the idea that all of the circles have a purpose and all of the subcircles within them have a purpose that upholds this purpose. And we decided to keep it looking like this and to continue to build circles and subcircles simply as we needed them. So now we had the structure, and we had the things that this structure would believe in, or the people within the structure. And then like a really interesting thing happened, which was that we we kind of all believed in values, but we didn't have specific written values, which was interesting because a lot of companies have values, and when we would talk about it, it would seem very much aligned, but we decided it was time to write them down. And so actually at this time, almost the entire organization took part in this, since they are values that belong in some way to the entire organization. And there was a massive project to actually define these in a way that we could write them down and reflect on them. And not only to define the values as just words, but also to describe them and what they meant to us, so that there was a clear and aligned meaning across the organization, so that we could always have something concrete that would be part of the organization, was something to strive for or to uphold as well. So now we're almost there, right? We have our 4 core themes, and we have the way that we are structured, and we have our 7 core values, or our 7 values. And to some degree, this builds a nice framework, but we thought that we still needed a bit more, because they weren't necessarily enough. And even with the structure and the core themes, it wasn't just alone enough. We wanted to have something that would guide people a bit more for specific decision making for everyday work, things that they could always reflect on and know were true about the organization. And so we created as well 7 guiding principles, which we felt gave a bit more context and outline to the way that we wanted to work towards our values and with these 4 themes. And that should give people, or do give people, some way when they're in their work, when they're thinking about making a decision or looking at how to approach something, can help them and guide them in this way. And then we reflected again, and we're scared as well at this point about processes, because we didn't want to create another heavy system, which is unfortunately very, very easy to do. And we wanted to keep it kind of as in the background as possible, to just make sure everybody could use it when they needed it, but wasn't constantly held down by it. But we did realize we needed some processes. And the processes that we realized that we really needed were to do a few things. They were to essentially make sure that terrible things didn't happen. And they were also processes that we thought, okay, this needs to be done the same across the organization. And if we have a clear idea about how this should be done, and if there's a benefit to doing it in this way, there's of course no reason to make it more opaque or not clear if in fact it desperately needs a process. And so we looked at all the processes that we had and all the processes we thought maybe we would need. And in the end, when we launched it, we launched with 3 processes. And these were the only 3 processes that we said really need to exist and be the same throughout the organization, and couldn't be left, for example, just to circles to decide, or to individual roles. And these processes were the advice process, which we consider maybe the most important process for a self-managed organization, because it involves asking for feedback and creating more alignment. When you're making a decision, for example, that might be something you can have the decision, like you have the decision-making power for. It doesn't mean that other people shouldn't know about it, or that other people don't know about it and can give you feedback that might be useful. So really using this to gather and then integrate feedback is something that's really, really important to us, and so we have a process for it. The other one is tensions. So tensions come from Holacracy, because we still have quite a lot of the language, and a way to basically see areas in the organization that could be changed or improved or just frankly done differently. And a clear way to raise these tensions, and then as an organization or as a circle, or depending on where this tension lies, really work through it and create something that moves us forward. And the third one was role formation. We felt that if we were going to have this system where so much would be left up to the circles and the roles, we needed to really clearly define what a role would look like, how it would be documented, so that it was clear how you could operate within this role and not feel unsure, but rather have a very clear outline for it. And so we launched with those 3 processes. We launched the system a little over a year ago, or we rolled it out to the team rather, and we did an update to it just in January, where we looked back over the year. We saw things that, of course, as the company grew, so when we first rolled it out, we were around 30, and then when we updated it, around 70. And what were things that had come up over this time that maybe the system wasn't addressing? Where were issues that we could fix, or what needed to now be included? And of course, processes are always part of this, again, because the organization grew, but we were very aware that we didn't want to just create more because we had more. And when we looked back at this, we added an additional 2 processes, which is now circle formation, which to some degree, I guess, is an extension of the role formation, but obviously as the organization grows, there's not only a need for new roles, but also new circles, and how we would address salary compensation and growth within the organization so that people could feel that they were developing and learning within the organization, had opportunities. So even though the organization had doubled, we didn't feel the need to double the processes, which of course for us was really positive, so that we could because we were able to see that people were still able to work within the organization without these processes. We were still able to do great things. So just to sum it up, as a final statistics as of now, we are about 80 people. We have 4 core themes. We have 7 values that will appear, 7 guiding principles, and we have 5 processes, which make up the entirety of the One OS, which of course is the Blinkist operating system. This is what we've been working with now for over 2 years, and or over a year rather. And we're very, very happy with the way that it has turned out. And now it's time for questions. Thanks.
I'm not sure if I understood correctly, because you mentioned that you kicked out a lot of processes, and I haven't found anything mentioned about the processes regarding the meetings. But if you could just name 2 major processes that made biggest challenges within the onboarding of new customers and running it.
So you mean 2 processes that we had before that were causing?
Yeah, that you kicked out after the Holacracy model.
Yeah. So we did get rid of the specific processes for the meetings. So if you're ever at the Blinkist headquarters, you might still see tactical meetings or something like this, because again, a lot of the language I think is still part of our culture, but the specific regulations for these meetings were something that we definitely got rid of, which of course includes the speaking order, or the way that you bring proposals, but also in this sense, we have a process now for tensions, but it's also not anywhere near as defined or specific as the Holacracy process was, with proposing and going through the steps this way. So these were 2 of the processes from Holacracy that we were using as part of Blinkist, and to an extent, and also that we felt we noticed we didn't need, and then got rid of. And even though we replaced one of them with a process of our own, we find that it's much lighter.
I get a question about the onboarding process when you bring in new employees. How do you onboard them if they actually are coming from a system that's not as modern?
It's a really good question, because actually it's one of the things we noticed with Blinkist or Holacracy that was an issue, that it's very time consuming to onboard people to, and you need to do a really good job. And so we've been working on this ever since we've rolled out the BOS, of how do we make sure that people within the organization really knows what it means. One thing I think that we do, which we also did with Holacracy and continue to do, is that we make sure that we're talking about it first of all already in the recruiting and hiring process. So nobody shows up at Blinkist on their first day and doesn't know that we have the Blinkist operating system, or that we're self-managed. They know both, but that's really important, because obviously that already starts it. So there's already this mindset that it's going to be different, and we do share with them some things before about the system. So there's already this base or understanding to some degree. And then within the onboarding process, we also try to speak a lot about how the operating system works and how it touches their work. So for example, defining the roles, the role creation process, it's already something that they're working with right at the beginning. So because it's not quite so heavy, and it's not you might not run into one of the processes until you've been there for 6 months or something, and it's all pretty much stuff you're working with at the beginning to some degree for at least the processes that we have. It's much more involved in the onboarding process, and then we make a special effort to also talk to them. So we have now meetings when people join. So we tell them, we go over everything a bit more in depth. We also have created a handbook that has like the specifics of it. It has other things about the organization as well, but it has a chapter about the Blinkist operating system, so they can know about the history, for example, and see the values. I mean, the values are in the office also, and the guiding principles. So we try and make it just much more apparent and talk about it more would be the short answer. And also that was part of the goal, that it wouldn't be something that would be so difficult to teach to new people.
A question, Holacracy, it seems like a really useful framework for starting to embed some of the mindset around things like self-organization into a reasonable sized company once you get past like the initial stages. But then where you've ended up feels so much better, where the process doesn't get in the way. And I was wondering if in hindsight, or if you were to be advising a company that was where you were 6 years ago, could you have bypassed the process going through Holacracy and straight to a leaner process? Or do you feel like that was like a necessary evil to go through type thing, to start thinking in that sort of a way?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So one thing is that I wasn't at the company 6 years ago. So I joined a little over 2 years ago. So when this, like before the transition happened and into it, so I saw the organization in the stages of Holacracy as well. So I can't talk like from personal experience about the first steps of implementation there. I can just say my own personal opinion. I don't know, it's a hard question. I mean, it's like saying, if you look at your life, like could things have been different? Would I be in the same place that I am? So to some degree, I think the fact that it was always like this priority, that it would be self-organized, that there was the idea that the organization would work on the organization itself, which is something I think is really very rare in organizations actually in general. But saying, hey, this is a priority, it's something we always want to work on, and this made it at the forefront, which means that when maybe things weren't working perfectly, there was this the response to it was something that could lead to something like this. So of course it's impossible to say for sure. I think though that the roots that existed in self-organization and the people that are there because of it is certainly like something that can't be overlooked.
My question involves decision making. When I hear you, not knowing a lot about it, but when I hear you describe the self-organized nature of the organization, it makes me wonder whether it's prone to either sort of chaos in decision-making or paralysis. And one of the biggest problems in organizations is being able to effectively take in information and have somebody who's willing to then make decisions. So how does this structure foster effective decision-making?
So I think that we don't have the issue necessarily like drastically in either direction, that we're either paralyzed by it or that people are just making decisions that in the end don't make sense, because there's also within it like the idea that decisions always like work for the organization. Of course, we have the values and the guiding principles that help with decision making. In regards to how it's distributed, all the roles have like within their descriptions like certain areas in which like that they can make decisions that are just up to them, for example, to kind of give a brief overview. And these should of course be decisions that make sense the most for the role, the idea being that they're in this role because they know about this and they can therefore make the best decisions on it. That being said, and obviously for decisions that are a bit bigger or affect larger or the entire organization, I mentioned the advice process, which is one of the few processes that we have, because it really it involves actually, like when you have a decision to make that's going to affect a greater portion of the organization, that you're actively asking for feedback on it and sharing information on it and being transparent about, to some degree, the steps or the ideas behind this, and then taking the feedback and integrating it into the final decision. So of course there's the idea that you have the power, if you will, to make the decision, but you're not just out there making the decision alone. And I think that this actually helps on both sides. So on the one hand, you are not just making decisions that might be really detrimental because you're getting a lot of feedback on them, and there's a lot of clarity and transparency throughout the process. And on the other hand, you're also not paralyzed because you might be scared about making the wrong decision. I think that's almost the harder thing. I think it's really easy to become scared if you come into an organization where people say, we trust you, right? Maybe that's not something that every organization does, and then you think like, oh no, they trust me, and what if I do the wrong thing? And I think that's something that we work on, that you have to also make really clear and work on within the organization, and that you grow very much in this sense. And also that by using these processes or by getting feedback, you're also able to learn more for yourself and be able to effectively make those decisions.
Self-management, holacracy, whatever you call it, BOS, it's kind of a rare organization, as you've already mentioned, and I wonder if you put culture fit somehow into the process of recruitment, and if so, what ways of improving the selection of candidates you have?
Do you mean, has it improved the selection, or?
No, the culture fit
Yeah.
of the candidate. If you put any bigger priority of this kind of things into the recruitment process.
I think culture fit is very important. Not least of all because you have to want to work in this type of organization. I think if you have no interest in working in a self-organized company, then of course it wouldn't, you wouldn't be happy. This wouldn't work out. So it's certainly something that we make sure to talk about, and is something we consider very much. I'm not in recruiting, so I can't talk specifically about it, but it's definitely something that we make sure is part of the process. That again, I think I said before, that nobody shows up and is just surprised that the organization is organized like this.
All right, thanks.
Great, I think we're more or less good with all the questions. Thanks a lot, Molly.
Que la famille.